Hey guys, so we're going to talk about LODs in this one, and first, let's go ahead and play with a cube and some bevels, and show you this thing and recap on it anyways. When I'm doing my videos, of course, I keep saying this in a number of them, that your models, when you do bevels, a chamfer, a bevel, right, usually you want to use even segments here, so like 4, 6, things like that. So we'll come over here and we'll try this on this one as well. Do 6 on this one. Okay. So what we're seeing here is that we have this center edge. That's what we're mostly looking for, is this center edge. Now there are some pros and some cons to doing it this way, and that is if we start reducing by dissolving edges, Control X, you'll see for the most part this works fine to dissolve the bevel, but at a certain point, if you had to dissolve even further, it starts to lose volume. Okay, so that's something you want to pay particular attention to. It can cause a little bit of a jump, but also you can see here, this one, we try to select every other one, even though we're using those even numbers, it starts to dissolve the middle if we did every other one. So uh, this one was 4, this was 6, and let's do an 8. So there are certain ones you want to use. Although you can use 6, it's sometimes not preferable, perhaps. See how this one works out? The 8. Okay, so that one works out a lot better in this sense. We can start lotting it down that way. Whereas this one, you're going to have a little bit more of a jump doing something like that. All right. You could potentially try to do that, but I don't know if there's any benefit to it at that point. So yeah, this one would have to be a little bit more of a dramatic jump, so it's not going to lot as well, perhaps. So do pay particular attention to these bevel counts as you're working on a model. So what we have over here is kind of an idea of a sink. I put it together real quick, and you can see we got some bevels on it, and it's set up pretty much the same way as those examples, right? Most of the main edges here have additional bevels on them, including the drain. Okay, we'll play with this one here again in a second, but if I grab all of this real quick and / to isolate it, you'll see that this is 1,850 faces, or 3,000 triangles. 3,500 triangles, actually. That's a lot of triangles for just a simple prop, right? And it'll eat up your performance at a certain point. In most game engines, Unreal Engine Nanite, you might just be fine with this because it has the the nanite system, which kind of does its thing, allows you to use a lot of polygons, basically, or faces. So if you were to lot this down though a little bit, you'll see that it's at 184 faces and 268 triangles. So a dramatic difference here between these two objects as far as triangle count goes. So this one will eat up performance very quickly, potentially, especially if it was something more like a rock or a game object that's seen a lot and repetitiously, where this thing's everywhere in the scene or something, right? So a lot of times what you'll do is you'll set these up to LOD very quickly. So you can consider the model without any detail loss a LOD 0, okay? But then as you back away, you want to kind of get rid of as much detail as possible for performance reasons. So that would be your LOD 1. Bump it back as much as you can without losing the quality of the model. And then as you go back further, you can really start to decimate things or LOD them heavily to the point that they're almost just really basic cubes and stuff, and not have any problems. But as you go further and further and further back in the scene, you'll go to eventually they'll cull, where the object no longer renders in the scene. So you might end up doing that. So there won't be no more lotting. It'll just be cold, right? So let's go ahead and play around with this idea. So we already know how to do the basics of breaking them down a little bit, but there's a couple other things that get involved here when it comes to the model itself. So we're going to isolate this one. And we could play around with a couple of the shapes and see what's going on here. Go into edit mode. So first of all, when you UV map things, the seam usually goes on that center line. talked about that a couple times in a couple videos. And the reason is when you press Control X and you dissolve here, it'll do this number, right? And you don't want to touch the seam, generally speaking. Let's turn on the materials so we can get a better idea what's going on here with the UVs. We'll see a little bit of texture jump. That's normal. Okay, like you're gonna have a hard time avoiding that. Like you GG twice, you'll see like this kind of slides around. That's really the shading changing, not the necessarily like the UV map changes a little bit, but the textures will slide around and shift a little bit as well. So that could be noticeable, but when you Control X and dissolve it, you'll see this occurs, right? And so now we have this smooth shading between these faces. A lot of times you'll go back and you'll select this whole seam and you'll mark it sharp, right? Especially if you're using the setup I've shown where you use weighted normals with keep sharps, face influences, and then triangulate. Keep normals, set it to 5. So when you bake it in Substance, bring it back to Blender, this is all set up like this still. When you send it to the game engine, you do it the same way. And it should render almost identical over in the game. It might be a little bit different, but anyways, we can keep going through this process. You can see this model now. Before I get carried away, because I should be working on a duplicate, actually. I wanted to preserve this thing, right? Don't do it on your actual model. You'd want a duplicate. And probably in the same area and just put it in a different collection or something. But we can go through this process now and start lotting it out. And you can see right here, if we mark that sharp, that'll bring that shading back a little bit. But we might break this thing down as heavily as we can, where maybe we dissolve like that whole center section as well. So we can do things like that. Depends on how much you need out of your lot, I guess. How much you're going to start breaking it down. I'm going to forward slash on that one middle piece real quick. So it's isolated. You can see there's a sharp down here, potentially. Mark it sharp. These little additional edges here, probably get rid of most of them. I don't need all of them. It'll just collapse however it collapses. You see here, this one. If we select one edge, you select, if you do like Control Shift click, it'll select rings. You can do select, check or deselect. Oh, I'm gonna add that to quick favorites real quick. So we can hit Q and then check or deselect. And if it was on the seam, you can offset these, right? So we will offset it so it's not on the seam. We can hit Control X, we can dissolve and reduce. Okay. Really simple process, right? It's not that bad. But you got to do it for the whole thing, and that's the fun part about it, right? So we could say like come through here. We don't need maybe these ones. Dissolve them. Dissolve them. If we're going to let's say LOD 0 full detail, LOD 1, maybe this is LOD 1, maybe LOD 2. We can go to this and then maybe mark that sharp beam, hold the shading a little bit better. It won't be that noticeable by the end of it. So we could leave the bevels here if we wanted to, just reduce that one maybe. Is this just extra? This was just extra in general. You don't really need it. Get rid of it. That's kind of an oversight. The other model probably didn't even need it, so you can dissolve those. Fine. Okay. Very quick little process. Not that hard to do. Some things like right here, you'll see if I dissolve this edge, this edge, this edge, and this edge, and break it down like that. We might want to mark this sharp. I held that in there a little bit. Sometimes you don't do that though. You don't always have to mark sharp. There's going to be times where it doesn't really help you much. Like it might even look better if you don't do it. So you can still play with your normals here, your shading a little bit. The way you would go about doing that though is you probably try to use the face influence to make little effects happen. So for example here, we had marked this sharp. We can clear the sharp. You see how the shading dramatically influenced everything, right? And so we can use face strength. So if you hit Alt N, set face strength, you can do weaks or strongs and try different results here. See what happens. Wow. Now this is only going to work if you have that weighted normal modifier, have face influence. Okay. But what this will allow you to do is kind of make it look more rounded in some ways. So if you wanted it to look like this whole surface was rounded still, you might tag it as like medium or weak. Might do these ones as strong. Well, that didn't work out. Okay, so we can't do that apparently on that one, but it could happen on the sides here too. Maybe we tag it as weak or strong. You see how much it influences the shading there. So just little things you can try to mess with and see get better results. Because you don't want to have noticeable transitions between these different models. You would want it to not have any like real poppy effects, like where you can see it collapsing or the shadings just going and tweaking out, things like that. So, but yeah, we can go through this whole process and do this number every piece. You can see the table is a good one to do. Table here, we did every other one. We'd end up selecting the seam, right? So sometimes you got to go ahead and just pick the ones you want to get rid of and do things like that. Okay. So have a nice clean geometry, even if it is Boolean Ngon geometry. Having it mostly quads, doesn't have to be all quads, but mostly quads would work out quite well in most situations. So we'll leave this one. You see, that's a nice reduction there. This can also be considered part of optimizing. So if your LOD 0, your full detailed model, if you don't need these additional edges, just get rid of them and tweak them and optimize them. You can still GG twice and slide things around. Sometimes you can get away with bevels too, a little bit. You can add things back even. Doesn't really mess up the UV map a whole lot. You want to try playing around with that. So, but at some point this will break down even further. You can see these are a little misaligned now because of the way that was set up. So I'd probably leave these and then lot them out later to the point where it's like something like this at some point, right? But you could do just maybe like the outside section. Maybe you don't do the top there yet, right? Some little ideas there for you to play with at least. And so it's a pretty forgiving thing once you get used to doing it. It's not something that like once you understand the bevels and how they work and you might have issues or might not have issues, it helps out quite a bit because now you can run through these things kind of fast. Also, like this edge, I'm not really a big fan of. Things like set flow, right? The set flow add-on. Sometimes it can help a lot in these kinds of situations, but it might skew your UVs quite a bit, so you have to be careful with that. Just play around with the different tools available to you, see what you can make happen, and have a little bit of fun with it, all right? And you can go through here, select every other one of these, dissolve that even, right? See, it doesn't really do a whole lot of damage to this texture UV. Right, and if you're just curious, this is just at the bottom here. A lot of times, I've been finding myself doing this more and more. I just want to mention it because it's helpful. You can see, like, well, I still have a. Oh, let's try this. What happened? Where did it go? Okay, I think got a little bit of an issue here. Let's see if I can. Okay. Normally, you can hit tilde key and press A, select everything. Tilde key, frame selected. Usually that helps if you ever lose it. So if I can just keep my UV in the view here just a little bit, and you have an add-on like text tools or something like that. A lot of times the only thing you really need is rectify, right? It's good. Oh, that's text density checker. Let's do text tools. You can see we can do rectify here. So as you're unwrapping things, you can just come in and rectify things as you're going along and unwrap them as you go. You don't need like a crazy add-on or some kind of special add-on. The text tools add-on, rectify will be right there. If you hit Control Spacebar, you can go full screen. So if you ever want to just focus on unwrapping for a little while, you'll have just that. And Control Spacebar, get out of it. Now it will reset rectify over here, so you'll have to scroll back down every time. I don't know why that occurs. Some other add-ons don't actually do that, but rectify or text tools certainly does. So it's a little bit annoying when that occurs or happens. But I guess you could just maybe drag that up a little bit. Let's see, maybe you could pin it. I don't know if you can actually pin this one, but right click, pin. So if we're all the way at the top here, so just that one menu, you can right click it, pin it. It'll be easier to find just that one here as a result, I think. So whenever you're jumping back and forth, see, won't be as much to look through. Because you won't want to go full screen most of the time. It's just a little bit later on you might. So play around with that idea if you want. And then you still have your asset browser if you set it up here. And you still have your timeline here hiding at the bottom. That number like that, right? Which is nice. Anyways, I just wanted to talk about that. Figured some of you guys might like seeing it. But yeah, so basically go through your whole model and just start working it back. That's it. Pretty simple. Nothing too fancy. You're gonna probably do a LOD 0, LOD 1, and a LOD 2. That's it. You don't usually need more than that a lot of times. It takes just a moment to create those, really. Just you could create the LOD 2 from the LOD 1, and then the LOD 0, you don't need to do much of anything. Optimize this first a little bit. Like this was LOD 0 here. You didn't need that. Get rid of it. But this, on the other hand, could be like, well, they're both about the same right now. This could be like a LOD 2 here. Yeah, this would be the LOD 1 possibly, because it still has a bevel on it, or like a chamfer. So overall, like let's see like which ones we see drop out of on a good angle, and bring them a little closer to. Bring this one closer. Let's see when they all start falling out. So just remember LOD 0, LOD 2, LOD 1. Okay, I know it's a little backwards, but you can see this bevel is noticeable. It's nice. This one, you can see it's definitely chamfered. That one's definitely sharp. But as you start backing away from it, you start to see that chamfer is catching up pretty quick to this one. That's still sharp. These are almost indistinguishable now, right? So you could probably swap the LOD 0 to the other LOD there, LOD 1. This is still too sharp. But as you keep backing up, we wouldn't be comparing this one now. We'd be comparing these two, right? You see here, this is the sharp. You'll see a little bit of the soft edge here, which is nice. It's actually pretty noticeable, but right about, yeah, I'd say right about here, it's completely gone for the most part. It's really hard to tell which one's chamfered. I mean, you can see it a tiny bit, but right here, it's definitely kind of lost out. So anything after this, you're really not going to see any difference for the most part. So at some point, you could eventually take these edges down as well. The only problem is this might snap a lot because of the dramatic shape change here. So you might end up taking little edges like this and just like moving them out a little. So you can actually make some pretty dramatic changes like that, just to try to preserve volume, more or less, is what's going to end up happening. So that's a little bit more. That's quite a bit of more work to do something like that if you wanted to be really precise with it. But it's not always required. Sometimes just if it has a little bit of a pop way back here, it depends on how much time you have to work on things. It might not be a big deal. You just live with it. And players don't really like it, but it's okay for the most part because it saves an immense amount of time compared to like tweaking every little object this much, anyways. And then you call it. Not too long later, back here, you just probably start calling things. So it just depends on your view distances, how big the environments are, and all that other fun stuff when you call it. But generally, a lot of calling systems also allow it to fade out before it calls. So that's nice. Right? And yeah, so that's LODing, guys, in a nutshell. It's pretty simple, right? It's not too hard. Now you can understand why I've been teaching the way I teach with the bevels, at least. Super easy to manage this stuff, right? Once you know what you're kind of doing with it. So, anyways, I'll check you guys out in the next video. Hope you enjoyed. Take care, all right?